Thank you again for joining. We're going to jump on in and talk about marketing psychology and really what the big picture of today is. We want to look at how can we understand ourselves and understand the companies that we're working with, the companies we might be mentoring, advising, and the companies we're leading. How can we understand psychology as a positive force, supplemental to our leadership ability, and take a look internally to ourselves and to our team to extract and apply some psychological principles and tactics in practice. From there, we're going to take the internal approach and bring it out to looking at a customer base, looking at a target audience. How can we best understand our audience, use principles of psychology to better our business and better the good we're bringing to the world through our company's value. So we got some great panelists that are joining us from both an internal perspective and an external perspective. We're going to give a little intro for each of our panelists, and they're going to share a little overview of their professional background and what it is they're doing nowadays. And I'm super excited to introduce Maren Laka. Maren runs, and she's the owner of a consultancy called Yes And. Maren is a St. Thomas grad as well, so we have some cool Tommy representatives on our board. Maren, would you like to share a little bit more about what you're up to, what Life Coach Consultancy looks like, and some of your background in psychology?
Yes, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be around St. Thomas students and alumni. So I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology from St. Thomas, and then went on to pursue my PhD, which turned into just leaving with a master's, being content there at Claremont Graduate University. And my master's degree is in positive developmental psychology. And why I chose to leave with that master's is because I got really interested when I started digging into the research in the application of that research. And that's what, in a combination of other things, led me to coaching, the coaching world. And that is what Yes And is. Yes And is all about coaching professionals and the high achieving rule followers to define, to maybe take a step back for the first time ever and say, what is your version of success? What does that actually look like? And then helping you to align your life and your career with your own definition rather than following maybe the prescriptive path that you've been on thus far. So I absolutely love what I do, and what I think is amazing about this panel specifically and how psychology ties into it is that positive psychology specifically is not only what I utilize in my coaching practice, in my workshops, and in working with clients, but also I utilize all the tenets and practices of positive psychology myself as a business owner and CEO to make sure that I really show up to my work every day with a positive lens, which doesn't just mean the positive emotions, the full reign, but being able to be my best self and really show up in the most profound way that I can to serve my clients and everyone that I work with.
Yeah, excellent. We're excited to jump in. Maren brings a great perspective around burnout, right? How can we continue bringing good and being incredibly dedicated and committed, as so many of us in the audience are? How can we keep doing that in a wholesome and healthy way that's sustainable? And it's really going to be exciting. So we're super excited to have Maren here. And Maren, I know that you've done some significant time in study and research around positive developmental psychology. And I know that that's, we can extract our own interpretations of that. But Maren, could you walk us through what does positive developmental psychology mean, and how does that apply into the workspace?
Yeah, so positive developmental psychology, I was really lucky in my graduate studies to work with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is, some of you may know him from Flow, and he's one of the original founders of the positive psychology movement. And in working with him, and what kind of the founders have decided is that if they could, they'd go back and change the name so that it's not positive psychology. Because when we think positive psychology, especially I think in Western culture and in America, we think of like happiness and outward joy and exuberance. And in fact, positive psychology is the study of well-being, and well-being includes the labeled negative and the labeled positive emotions and experiences. Well-being includes all of it. It's all about riding the waves. And so positive developmental psychology is how can we be with everything that happens in life in a way that continues our well-being and fosters us to flourish. When things go right, what are the practices in place? What are the elements in place? And then how can we enhance that while knowing that things going right doesn't mean the elimination of any of the negative experiences or negative emotions. It means being able to be with them in a productive, efficient, well way.
I think that that's super rich, because it's hard, at times to avoid that this is negative or this is not good. This is definitely a huge hiccup. Positivity plays a role for sure. I think that I would agree with that, and it is encouraging. It's okay when it's not okay in
Mhm.
some situations. Marin, can you share a little bit more about yes and tell us a little bit about starting that out, and expand a little bit with the well-being approach to business.
Sure. Yeah, so in my intro, I shared who I work with, which are these, and who I work with is very much, I think, of like myself and or my historic self of like the high achiever, the go-getter, the rule follower. And where that likely leads my clients is to a place that's objectively successful, but still something about it doesn't feel successful. And if something doesn't feel successful or feel right, what I found is that it's likely because we haven't had the space or the awareness, or just the practices or support to go in and say, what is it that we want? And for some of my clients, that looks like drastic changes, like starting their own business or leaving a career or moving to Norway. One of my clients is about to do that. And for some of my clients, it's staying in the same, staying in the same exact role, not leaving any relationships or doing anything drastic. But for instance, tying into what I just spoke to, one of my clients right now, the past few sessions, we've worked on how, like, her whole belief change and perception change of negative emotion or even conflict within relationship or work isn't bad necessarily, right? It's that there are many options to be with that, and that, right, rather than saying it's bad, it's just more information, more data to utilize to make decisions, and to make these decisions from a place of empowerment and a place of authenticity, which I find to be maybe an overused word right now, but from a place of alignment with our own values and our own desires and our own goals and our own fears, as well. And speaking to all of that, what I really enjoyed from the conversation that David and Emily were bringing up is that I'm right now a solopreneur. I have, I work with, hire some contractors, but I, for the most part, it's me and myself. And although that might sometimes feel simpler, or if there's anyone in the audience who is an entrepreneur, solopreneur, I find with myself and my clients is that rather than managing a team of other people, I'm managing the team that's going on inside my own head. And so those very traits that
Yeah.
you're taking into organizations, I'm taking that into myself of whenever I'm about to take a risk or whenever I'm about to put myself out there, it's me kind of sitting down at my metaphorical boardroom with, my fear voice and my excited voice and my kid voice and all these different parts of me that make up yes and, even though it's just me at the head. And I can use some of those same management techniques and same techniques that we use in organizational psychology, for instance, with my clients and myself, thinking of all the little caricatures that are within us that navigate our decisions, whether it's subconsciously or consciously.
Mm, that's awesome. Yeah, thinking about that approach for your internal board, and I had the picture of Inside Out, the cartoon, right?
Yes.
Of, the little characters that are buzzing around up there. And to go on that point, I think it obviously is super important to know where you're coming from into situations, right? And know the emotions you're coming and bringing in. Can you, and this is for our whole panel as well, but would you guys mind sharing some pointed tips to, like, how do you stay in tune with yourself? It's easy to, my wife works in special education as a behavioral analyst and with emotional behavior disorders. She talks about an executive state and an emotional state of your mind, where you want to be in your executive state for decision making, but it's easy to be in our emotional state. And talking about that tension, I'd love to hear, what would you guys say, what are helpful things for leaders, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs to be doing on checking where we're at and what we're bringing into conversations?
I, of course, am a little biased, but what I've seen and what I hear time and time again from those that I look up to and that I work with is having a support system, which for me has been a coach, always in my corner. I really think, I shared with the panelists before any attendees joined, that I've navigated COVID in a way that I'm really proud of. And I think I've been able to do that because I've had from the get-go a coach and thus a developing foundation internally for me who's running my business that's really solid. And I still have a coach, and I foresee always having a coach, which is just to say, and maybe, maybe you like a community more, so you're working with a mastermind, or maybe you're, always doing continuing education or something to keep you going and developing. But what I found really unique about coaching specifically is I've never before experienced such high touch views and awareness, specifically to Jake, what you just brought up, of me knowing myself. I can take a course and learn something new, but that's still putting it externally and outward, rather than what I experience with my coaches is going in and really illuminating those shadows, illuminating all those characters, illuminating all the self-sabotaging things, as well as the skills and the talents that I have that I want to bring out even more. Having that one-on-one space, whatever that looks like for you, I found to be by far the most powerful and the best way for me to navigate and to have that foundation from the get-go, so that I can continue to show up for myself and my clients in the most powerful way.
Mm.
Well, I think I'd say I like all of that. I think one thing Maren has that I'm quite jealous of is that she mentioned she studied under a guy called Csikszentmihalyi, who's got one of the hardest names to spell and is one of the greatest psychologists in this area in the world. So I'm quite jealous of that.
He's outstanding. Yes.
Yes. I think I've read all of his books. They're wonderful.
I was just going to add on top of that I've heard it said that coaching collapses time. And sometimes that can be like, what I often say is, I'm the guide. I don't know your life better than you know your life. But I have the questions and the tools to help reflect for you and really dig under what's actually going on. But speaking to what your father told you, David, is sometimes people are like, well, why would I pay you if I already know these answers? And my answer to that is, well, are you following through with those answers? Do you really see those answers? Do you want to know those answers now, or do you want to know those answers in 10 years once you've already gone down a career path that maybe isn't as great, or whatever else it looks like externally?
I think that idea of coaching collapses time is fantastic, and you probably saw me writing it down as you were speaking. I'm going to use that.
Yes.
This is great. For all of our guests, this has been really us on the panel getting to take notes from each other here. But I have one more question on this topic of looking internally, understanding ourselves, our company, our leadership roles, before we look externally. What does this look like in operating our businesses? And the questions for all of our panel, and it's from Lois in the audience. It's great to be valuing our strengths and the running in our lanes, so to speak. How do we deal with weaknesses and weaknesses that can characterize as problems in consistent situations? What feedback would you guys have for ourselves and for leading companies to deal with our weaknesses?
This is a slightly different perspective, but I love those two examples. And I think, of course, your strengths are in actually having teams, right? Like other human beings and how to deal with weaknesses in that situation. Something I also do, again, individually as a CEO, as a business owner, but also with my clients. When weaknesses come up, I feel like there's absolutely a time to stop, to delegate, to say, this is my weakness. It's not efficient for me to do this. It's not best for the team or for the business for me to do this. And I think there are some times when we can dig under the weaknesses, dig under the roadblocks or the fears that are coming up. So I'll share a personal example of, historically, I've been really afraid of taking risk, especially financial risk, because what's under it is that I really desire safety and feeling safe. And had I just labeled myself as I'm scared to take financial risk, that would have limited as a business owner, that would have limited everything. I wouldn't have been able to start my own business. But because I was able to work through and get under what's going on there, what I do now whenever I feel that limitation, that weakness, is I stand in, I feel very safe right now. And maybe, pull in some extra things that make me feel extra safe if I'm in a place of risk. But I think that element of also digging under the weakness and what is that actually illuminating, oftentimes it speaks to our values or, different things just to keep in check so that we don't let those completely limit us from what we're capable of.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a very valuable point that transitions us in how we look at risk. And we might hear stories of, you must have been crazy to start a company in in the economy like today, or 2008 or 2000, right? And historically, we've actually seen 5 of the biggest companies in the United States come out of those recessions. Apple and Microsoft were 76 and 1977. We saw 1999 Alphabet start. In 2000, we saw Amazon start. And in 2008, we saw companies like Airbnb pop up. And I'm really excited to see where entrepreneurs rise to the occasion now. And one of the ways that I heard from those stories and examples, it isn't as risky as we might think or believe it to be. Maren, you're a great example of betting on yourself, right? Betting on the safety of yourself and running to execute that way. Emily and David and starting your companies too. I'd like to transition some of that value and, knowing your strengths internally and the strengths of your team that builds the safety and mitigates your risk for starting something or taking a new avenue on, translating that to the marketplace now and looking at being confident in the value that you're bringing, the specific marketplace you're serving. And I'd like to specifically ask if you guys could talk a bit towards how do you transfer these out to, staying in our lane from a marketing perspective with the value that you're bringing, right? Trying to avoid being all things to all people. What are some of the important things to understand about staying in your lane for the value your company's bringing and the people? Not necessarily the businesses or clients, but the people that are behind your customer base.
Yeah, Emily, that last statement you said, if you feel good about it, I feel like that's one of, obviously you can tell from what I've said today, one of my core tenets, both in how I help my clients and also myself. And what I think of, a phrase that I often live by is like, what's best for you is what's best for me, or what's best for me is what's best for everyone else. And with that idea, I think staying in my lane and also, helping people who come to my door. I think a great example of this is recently I had a huge uptick in people looking for coaching services because of COVID-19. And at the same time, a lot of people were asking if there's a more financially friendly option because of COVID-19. And what didn't, one option, but what didn't feel good for me is to discount my services and suddenly have so many clients on my plate. And then actually I couldn't serve them. So even though I was technically doing what they were asking of me, I wasn't going to be my best self, and thus they weren't going to get the service, the value that they deserve and that they were asking for. And so instead what I did is I, gave myself some space and, looked at what was being asked and then circled back to what feels good for me to approach this problem and this challenge in front of me. And for me, that was creating a free weekly group call, which I do every Tuesday night now and has been amazing. It feels great for me. It's free, so the financially friendly, but it's a group. It's everyone who had been coming to me all in one place rather than me, spreading myself way too thin. So I can show up with so much value for them, but with boundaries. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs, or when we're just getting started and it's like taking any work that comes to our door, we can fall into that trap of spreading ourselves too thin. And I think that's quite dangerous. Not only that, again, we might not be giving the value that's being asked and that's, will lessen our value in the long term, but also then we get burned out as entrepreneurs and as business owners, and we get lost. And then it's 5 years later and it's like, wait, this was not what I had in mind for this business. Where did my stake in the ground go? Like going so far off track. So I think it's of course, listening to our customers, listening to what's being asked, and tying that into how can I solve this problem in a way that feels really good for me? And sometimes that also means delegating or referring to someone else or a different service. Or sometimes that just means being creative in how I can show up and go at that problem, again, in a way that feels good for me, which in turn will benefit everyone far better than any other mode.
Certainly, yeah. Something that we talk around generator quite often is continue practicing your expertise, continue running with what you're an expert in, and yes, there's facets of, well, that's common sense, right? We've talked a lot about common sense. Maybe just had we've cleaned the windshield off a little bit for us to understand that today. But another layer to when we talk with startup founders about continuing to be their expert, it's okay if you're not touching every aspect of your market. It's okay if you're not running down those avenue. And actually, a point that you bring up, Marin, which is really exciting for a local economy, is if you know someone that meets the expertise of a customer interested in yours for the wrong reason, referrals are great. If you think about how that cycle hopefully goes in, for example, our Twin Cities ecosystem, hopefully that brings a lot of people that really need what you provide to your doorstep. And I think that kind of that sharing platform for our network is important, and it plays into running in your lane, knowing your market, which in turn leads to an operating business that knows their company and knows their strengths. So I'd love to bucket that up, send it out to our attendees as well. Know your strengths, know where you're playing and what plays really well, and know others around you, whether they're part of your business or not, and play to that. You can certainly send people on to other opportunities and other experts as it makes sense, and hope that your labor will not be in vain running down your lane and being the expert that you are. I know that we're at time here. I've been utterly blessed by all three of you joining here today. This has been fantastic. I have 3 pages done of notes while we were going through all of this. And I'm super, super glad to have had you all here.